Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Petovi Angular Team's October meetup. We're experts in front-end development, Angular, React, Node.js, DevOps, project management, UX, and more. If you need application development help, reach out for free consultation by emailing contact@petovi.com or visiting our website at petovi.com. I'm Wade Harkins. I'm one of our Angular developers, and I'm joined here today by Kyle Nazario and Igor Ciric. And we're going to be discussing how to enable strict mode incrementally in Angular applications and taking a look at what's new in Angular 14. So we're going to have Kyle go first. So whenever you're ready, Kyle, take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Wade. Let me share my screen so you all can see my slides. All right. Okay. So today we're talking about strict mode in TypeScript and how to adopt that piece by piece. Strict mode is, in my opinion, the best way to write TypeScript. It's really it's the whole point of using TypeScript, right? Like, it's to help prevent runtime errors before they even happen. And it's really, really, really useful. And I would definitely recommend it for any team. It can just be like a little tough to implement. So when we talk about strict mode, if you write strict:"true" in your tsconfig file, that's actually a shorthand for a couple different properties. As of the latest version of TypeScript, here's what setting strict:"true" does for you. It enables all of these TypeScript compiler flags. And all of these will do extra type checking on top of regular TypeScript functionality to make sure that you're not, going to run into some weird errors with JavaScript and type coercion and that kind of thing. So I'll just run through these real fast. No implicit any says if there's ever a variable or a function parameter and TypeScript, the automatic type inference can't figure out what it is and falls back to the any type, then that'll throw an error. Same thing for this rule. If you're ever referencing the this keyword and TypeScript can't automatically figure out what this means, then it'll throw an error for that. Always strict will turn on ES5 strict mode for all of your outputted files. Even though they have the same name, this is actually completely different than strict mode in TypeScript. ES5 strict mode is something that's built into JavaScript, and what it does is it throws an error whenever you try to do things in JavaScript that are, well, kind of nonsensical. If you don't use ES5 strict mode, then all of these things just fail silently. So like you can see in the code example, if you try to assign a value to undefined or infinity, that'll, with ES5 strict mode, that'll just throw an error. So you should definitely have that on. Strict bind call apply just means when you use bind, call, and apply, you have to pass correctly typed function parameters. Strict null checks. This is the really good one. This one says if, say you have a variable whose type is string or undefined, you cannot just use that variable as if it's definitely a string. You have to like put some code in there to handle like if this exists, if it is not undefined and not null. It's really, really useful for type checking because I think a lot of the times JavaScript developers, we don't really think about how many things could possibly be undefined or null. Like in this code example here, that find function, like that could return undefined if the thing you're trying to find is just not in the array. And I think a lot of the time as JavaScript developers, we're not used to thinking about handling, well, what if that happens? And this flag helps, make sure that you do handle those cases. Strict function types just checks and makes sure that if you want to treat two functions as the same type, that they have the same parameters and return types. Strict property initialization says if you want to type something as being like in the code example, definitely a string, then you have to either give it a value when you declare the variable or assign it a value in the constructor. Actually, if you put an exclamation point after that, that tells TypeScript, I know I didn't give it a value here at declaration or in the constructor, but trust me, there's a value there. This one can be a little frustrating with Angular in particular, because one of the best practices in Angular is to do as much work as you can and ng in it. But of course, TypeScript doesn't really recognize Angular lifecycle hooks as being a valid place to initialize your variables. And then the last one is just like a little weird rule. Use unknown and catch variables just says like if you want to treat an error variable in your catch block as like literally an instance of the error class, you have to check and make sure that it's an error, because technically you could throw whatever you want from that try block. So that's strict mode, and it's really good and useful at catching all of these problems in advance, which is again like the whole point of TypeScript. But it can be tough to implement, right? Like I was saying before, the property initialization stuff that sometimes doesn't play well with types with basic Angular best practices. Like for example, if you have a view child, like you're never going to assign that a value in Angular, but it does have a value because Angular assigns it a values, and TypeScript can get a little confused by stuff like that. And then also just when you're adopting strict mode, this can be a little challenging if your team is not used to it. Like I think a lot of teams are just used to the sort of loosey-goosey nature of JavaScript and its very generous type coercion and all the crazy things you can do. And then and it can be hard like to see the benefit of having those stricter rules when the compiler is just yelling at you all the time. And speaking of that, the last major issue with strict mode in TypeScript is just like it's literally just hard to adopt. When you turn it on, like if you have an existing legacy application of any real complexity, that can be a lot of build errors. So how do you adopt strict mode, right? Because you don't want to adopt it and then have to tell your product owner, hey, sorry, features are paused for 2 weeks while we fix build errors, right? Product owners famously do not love when you do that. So one way to get strict mode into your code base and to get that higher quality type checking is to do it piece by piece. Real fast, if you want to do this, do not do multiple tsconfig files. If you Google how to do TypeScript strict mode incrementally, there are a lot of resources online that tell you to do this. All of them are wrong. This is just, it does not work. Basically, if you have multiple tsconfig files, you have to run TypeScript compile once to do all the type checking and the transpilation for every tsconfig file. So you can't have like a subfolder with a tsconfig file with strict true. That just does not work. Instead, what I would recommend doing is enabling some of the individual flags. So like remember, setting strict to true is shorthand for all these individual properties. So what I would do is set strict to true, do a build, and then count the instances of errors. If you have like no errors for strict bind call apply, then instead of setting all the strict mode rules to true, maybe set that one to true immediately. And maybe you can enable strict function types with like 1 or 2 fixes. And you can get that, enabled and protecting your code today. So I would do that, pick the low-hanging fruit, and then maybe put stories in your team's backlog to go back and do some of the harder strict mode updates like strict null checks or property initialization. And while you're doing that, there's actually some really good third-party tooling that helps with your adoption. My favorite is this TypeScript-strict plugin. This is just an NPM package that lets you do one of two things. One, you can enable strict mode for just the files that you select. So maybe, you could like pick a small group of files in the beginning, and then over time your team would uh, opt more and more and more files into being checked in strict mode until eventually the whole application is in strict mode. Or what you can do is say, okay, I want my whole application to be checked using strict mode, and then I will exempt certain files from strict checking. So you could even say, enable strict mode and then exempt your entire existing application. So that way, any new file that's added to the project will be guaranteed to be in strict mode. And then over time, as your team has like capacity for some technical debt payoff, you can go back to the old files, edit them, make them compatible with strict mode, and then unexempt them from strict type checking. That one that's a really good incremental way to do it. The biggest downside is just like, it's another item in your build pipeline. There's also a nice little package, which is a little simpler, called TS-strictify. It just requires you to implement strict mode on any file you touch, and you can even have it as a pre-commit hook. That's a good way to sort of do what I was talking about as well, where you just sort of add strict mode to all the things you have to touch, and then as time goes on, your code base gets better and better and better. It's just, a little tough if you have to edit like some really big file. So with all that in mind, I would say the best way to implement strict mode incrementally is just enable all the flags within strict mode that you can do immediately. Just like get all the easy ones, and then use that first package, typescript-strict-plugin, to just exempt all of your existing code, make sure all the new code is ready to go, and then put some stories in the backlog to unexempt the old code, to update it so it can be so it can meet the standards of strict type checking. And that's about it. Do we have any questions from the chat or anything?
No, I have not seen any questions. I have a question just in lieu of other people having questions. Those packages you mentioned, the ones that allow you to mark specific files or make it so that only files that get modified have the strict check enforced. Do you know how those work? Like, do those somehow plug into like TypeScript's compiler, or are they doing some other sort of wizardry under the hood, or do you not know?
I believe the first one is a TypeScript compiler plugin,
Okay.
and I think the second one you just add it as a pre-commit hook.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's just running the strict checks on files as they get changed, and then preventing you from committing. That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, we do have one question. Do you have any suggestions for strict property initialization? That's a camel case string, so I'm assuming that's an option.
Yeah, that's one of the sub flags within strict mode. Um, any suggestions for just like how to handle that?
I guess. Or any pro tips on using it? It's from Fabio. He
Um,
didn't give any more details. Okay, he said yes, just in an Angular project, so a little bit more information.
uh, Yeah, to be honest, I think your best bet is just to use that exclamation point operator, which tells TypeScript like, I know I didn't assign a value, but yes, I'm positive this view child, will have an object here at
Gotcha.
runtime.
Okay.
And but also to make sure you have like a good PR review process so that like people aren't just abusing the exclamation point.
Yes, that's also a very good tip. Okay, yeah, I
Yeah.
actually remember what that property is now that you've mentioned what it's for. Cool. Oh, Papio also asks whether you recommend using that approach for inputs as well.
Um,
I guess as opposed to having them have initial values.
maybe not actually, because like it depends what you pass into the input. Like maybe something won't be there. I
Yeah,
mean, maybe if you are 100% sure that component will always have that value be have it have a value be passed into that input, but yeah, maybe not. Or actually, one approach that I've seen done a lot is you have an input and then you just assign it like some placeholder initial value.
yeah, I think
So if
that's what I would probably go with as well.
yeah, if
Just
it's
having it
like
as a default value.
a string input, just give it an empty string.
Yeah. Yep, I think that makes sense.
Mhm.
So Mark is saying that he likes to bank on what the expectation is. So if you'd rather the component error at runtime because the value is required, or do you want it to function without its input? Which makes sense. I guess there's also some cases where you are expecting a value and having an initial value set. You would either have to make sure that it has changed from that initial value inside of your component, um, or just, yeah, or else I guess it would just fail without having any error messages. So good
Sure.
tip there as well.
For sure. Sometimes you do want the application to throw up a big error and crash.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I am going to assume that that is the last of the questions, and we can move on to Igor talking about what's new in Angular 14.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay, so Angular 14 is now available. So let's go through the new features and see how they works in example. Um, Angular 14 comes with big new features, standalone components, typed forms, and the new inject function. On this GitHub link, you can find the product source code that includes everything that we will cover in this presentation. And here is the link to the application that is built up using the only standalone components. So before we start, let's see the project. So the whole project was made without modules, and everything is actually built up using the standalone components. At the top, we have a search form that's made with a new feature, typed forms. And let's search for a movie, for example, Batman movie. And after we choose one movie from the list, we can see all details related to that movie in a new component that's loaded using the lazy loading. And the title of the page is also changed through the new title parameter in the router that also comes available in new version of Angular. Okay, so let's start with the standalone components. First, the new approach of using the standalone components can help us to reduce the unnecessary code, especially for smaller projects, because they don't need to be declared in module. We can create our first standalone component using the Angular CLI command. And let's see how actually our standalone component looks. The component decorator now has a new property called standalone that has the value set to true. And since we will use in our example reactive forms, we needs to import them, as well the other standalone components, movie card, and common module. We can see standalone components explicitly manage their own dependencies from the imports. And the kind of important thing is that the import array only accept the other standalone components or the other ng modules, but modules without providers. And like here is the router navigation for standalone components, and it can be used as a normal. And also one of the biggest feature of standalone components is they can simplify lazy loading. And we are below you. I mean, here you can see how actually we use lazy load for our movie info component. And also, like previously we saw, here is like a title properties that allow us to improve accessibility by changing the title of our pages directly from the router. Sorry. So let's actually change the way how the application will be bootstrapped. So from the main TS file, we will start our application from the standalone components. And we will use the bootstrap application function. And as the first parameter, we will provide our app component that is like a standalone one. So more or less, like you can start using standalone components today, and they are compatible with your existing applications. Typed forms. So the type form present the next big feature of Angular 14, and as we saw before, for example, our movie search component is implemented the typed forms. In Angular, we could handle the form with a template-driven approach or by using the reactive approach. Typed forms, this new feature is only applies to the reactive forms, not to the template-driven forms. And basically, there is no change to the template-driven forms. Like you can see, the template, the HTML part of the code stays the same. And from here, we can see actually how the typed forms looks. In our example, we have the title and the type of the movie or TV show that we are looking for. And so one of the benefits of using the typed forms is autocomplete, which gives the full insight of available values and their types. In our example, we have the title and the type. And also, I mean, previously we couldn't get that information since form group was basically type any before. So we didn't know like what was inside, and that's changed now. Also, if we want, we can use the old form controls using the untyped form control. This especially can be actually useful when we are upgrading from the older versions of Angular. Command ng update will also automatically do those transformations for us. So old form controls will be transformed into untyped form control. The new inject function, this feature help us to simplify inheritance with our application. Our movie-based abstract class here injects the router, the movie service, and activated route. So our movie card component doesn't need to provide it inside the constructor and super method like we would do before. And that also can be used inside of the components, directives, and pipes. So, like you can see, the new Angular 14 comes with cool new features that actually we can start using from today in new applications or to improve existing one. I'm not sure, is there any comments? Rich?
So don't have any questions that have come through on chat yet. However, once again, I have some questions that I want to ask. The first one, and this may be more of as a person that only learned Angular a couple years ago, do you know whether, and I assume this is possible, but I'm not entirely sure, even if you go completely standalone with your components in an application, can you still use modules to, say, group a collection of components together that you know you're going to need to import probably, or maybe not even components, maybe that's not a good choice. Maybe like a component and a couple directives that you think you're going to probably be using throughout your application, just so you don't have to import, 5 different things each time. I know I played around with this a little bit, and I know there's a module you can import that has things like ngif and those directives. So I'm just curious if that's something that it's still possible to do on your own with components, like group them into a module, import those, and still use them in other standalone components.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. Honestly, like this is kind of really new feature, and in this example that I build up using only the standalone components. I mean, from my point of view, it's just like a point. It's a matter of time to become more familiar and used to it, to way of thinking like how to actually organize the folder structure and the whole app. I mean, I'm also like fan of using the modules, but this is completely kind of a different approach. But I mean, after I made up this this example one application, actually it seems as a really cool something like cool thing that definitely in the long term, like in future, can become more popular. So yeah, I think that actually we can do a mix of using the modules, and then, like I said, we can inject the modules. If they don't have a providers, we can inject them inside of the standalone component. So use the benefits from both.
Okay, cool. We do have a question from Edward asking, do you see the standalone equaling or having standalone set to true in the future being used more than modules? So like rather than people doing the modular approach, do you think standalone components are going to be like widely adopted and become the more common use case?
Yeah, actually, I mean, on small projects, yeah, I mean, I personally I see this as a kind of answer on React, since if you want to build up a small project, people rather will go with React. So now we can do, I mean, more or less the same thing in Angular. So yeah, I mean, also like for the project like this one or something like that. Yeah, why not? Like, not like in a couple of months, but yeah, in the future version of Angular, people, I think, will actually start using more and more standalone components. I guess we will have also some like standalone components predefined, so we can use them like a starter project or something like that.
Cool. Yeah, I know from the little bit I've played with them, they're nice, but my only hesitations are how big are your import lists going to get inside of each individual component inside that decorator? which I know is still better for like tree shaking and stuff than just having everything declared in your module and assuming all of them can be used. And then I guess the other thing being, once you've got a standalone component, you can only use standalone components inside of your standalone component, which isn't necessarily a problem. It's just something you have to think about and choose. Like if you're building a reusable piece of your application, you have to either go full in or make sure that you're choosing to do that at a level where you're not going to be trying to nest other things that aren't standalone within them. So that's all I had for questions. But a comment and something that I think is interesting is I had seen the inject function before, but wasn't really sure what merited its existence, other than like, hey, I don't have to include this in my constructor. I can just assign this value inside the class or inside of somewhere else in the code base. But the use case of having it inside of like an abstract class is actually kind of cool.
Yeah, very, very useful, even like on bigger project, because once you extend some class, you don't need to think about it, like about everything that is injected in that class that you extend. So,
Yeah,
I
and
mean, very,
also
very like nice feature.
makes having to, if you want to, if you are extending a class, I know the constructor can get cumbersome if it's got 3 or more dependency injection parameters, private parameters in there. You have to figure out how to pass those along and understand what those types are. Whereas if you're extending a class that's
Yeah,
using those injectors, then you don't have to worry about passing those along. Those will just come along for free, assuming that they're declared at the class level. So yeah,
yeah.
cool stuff. Well, I don't see any more questions coming through on Twitch. So I guess we can go ahead and wrap up unless either of you have anything else you'd like to say. Okay, I'm going to take silence as indication that we've said all we wanted to say. So thanks everybody for watching. These will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel. I think we've got a playlist for our meetups. We've also got a live coding playlist. Hopefully we'll be getting back doing the live coding fun streams here in the next week or two. Our schedule is not certain on that yet, but we will be announcing those on Twitter as they get scheduled. So thanks again, Kyle and Igor, for sharing, and we'll see you guys next time.